I mean, Paul, he just couldn't catch a break at this time. So you had McCartney, his first album comes out, and it does well on the charts, but gets torn apart critically, and a lot of the fans aren't very happy with it either. That would opinion would change in subsequent years, but at the time it was considered a lightweight throwaway album. And then to make matters worse, in between that and his next release, John and George released these sort of huge monumental statement albums and makes McCartney look all that much more lightweight in comparison. The first album, McCartney. And to add further insult, Ringo shows up. McCartney has a huge hit with the single It Don't Come Easy in April of 1971. Now, McCartney, in the early part of 71, and the McCartney album came out in 1970 there, a month or so before the Let It Be album came out. Early part of 71, he drops a 45, Another Day, back with Oh Woman, Oh Why. Um, Both of those, I think, songs are better than anything on the McCartney album, even though I do like things on the McCartney album. Love that. Another Day is probably my favorite, all-time favorite Paul McCartney solo song. A Woman Oh Why is great too. It's just Paul screaming and working out the pain of the Beatle breakup and the depression that he's in at the time, and just sort of a rocking, upbeat, rollicking number. So, sort of and he said this in interviews in response to McCartney, which was just sort of, there were bits of it were done professionally in Abbey Road studios, but a bunch of it was just done in his house, just had a home recording studio, plug in the tape deck, and let's start playing and improvise until we come up with some songs type attitude, which is something that Bruce Springsteen, in a very different way, but same spirit, would do to much success 12 years or so later with the Nebraska album. But that's a different time and a different story. So, with the sort of stripped down, uh, let's lose the grandiosity, production, and stuff, just simple go in there and do it attitude of McCartney, not getting much critical respect or fan respect. Paul went the opposite direction the next time and did make a big production album, which came out in May of 71. Came out a few days apart, but May of 71 in both the United States and England. Did better in England. This went to number one in the UK, only got to number two in the USA. And generally nowadays is regarded as Paul's best solo album and as one of the, if not the best, Beatles solo album. That was, it had its fans back then, I'm sure, but that was, obviously it sold well. But that was not the case when it got released in 1971. This one, like the McCartney album, got savaged by the critics and ripped apart. And a lot of the fans were starting to lose faith in Paul as sort of a lightweight. A lot of people were starting to write him off as, now that he doesn't have the Beatles and doesn't have John Lennon to help him out, it's obvious that he's just sort of a guy writing granny songs, which is incredible when you kind of see that somewhat with the McCartney album, but with this, it's incredible that that was ever the attitude of the day. But it was. This was, like I said, kind of a reaction to the stripped down nature of McCartney. Let's go big production, full band. McCartney played pretty much all the instruments, so I think he did play all the instruments on McCartney, and it's him and Linda on vocals. Here it's him and Linda, and then a bunch of people playing. Danny Sewell, Dave Spinoza, Hugh McCracken, and others. So a full band. It's not Wings yet. It's still, this is the only album that is credited to Paul and Linda McCartney, I believe. But anyway, so they recorded this in New York. And like I said, it just got ripped apart at the time. It was, Rolling Stone called it incredibly inconsequential and monumentally irrelevant in their review. Ringo said Paul seems to be going strange. There's not one good tune on this album in an interview with Melody Maker at the time. which is funny because you never heard Paul say anything about Ringo about that. But him and John did get in a back and forth fight because John took a lot of the lyrics on this album to be pointed, little diatribes against him and Yoko. And Paul said that in some cases they were, but in a lot of cases they weren't. One of them that John thought was sort of ragging on him, Paul said was actually talking about Linda's first husband, not John. And then John, of course, in the follow-up album to Plastic Ono Band Imagine, had How Do You Sleep and some other attacks on Paul McCartney. And so there was a lot of fighting in the band. The band was breaking up. They were in court. They'd already broken up, really, but they were in court fighting over the pieces of the band, and things were not happy for any of them. But somehow he manages to, in the midst of all that's going on, do what I would certainly consider Paul's best solo album, and I would consider one of the best Beatles solo albums. So yeah, it's again this album in the '70s. The critical consensus was that it pretty much stunk. I wish I still had the Roy Carr and Tony Tyler Beatles Illustrated Record book. I need to get another copy of that. They just tore it apart, that and this. But in this book, Growing Up with the Beatles, the author says that too many people, I think, is where he I was looking. Yeah, too many people is the high point. Unfortunately, it's all downhill from there. It's sloppily made with too many loose ends that go nowhere. So that was the thought there. Here in Nicholas Schaffner's Beatles Forever book, which came out in '78, I believe, says that it's a pretty thing, but it's snatches, none of which hang together, are terribly memorable. Ram brings to mind a hollow chocolate egg. It's tasty, if just this side of sickly sweet, yet crumbles when one tries to sink one's teeth into it. So that was the thought. And in the years since, critical consensus has completely, or well, almost completely done a 360, and this is held in high regard by most and considered one of his best. I don't know that Paul was aware of that because he rarely does any of these songs in his concerts. I wish he was aware of it and would do this whole album in concert instead of trotting out Hey Jude, Live and Let Die, and Band on the Run for the 800th time. Change it up a bit and play some of this stuff. I don't know that he really has the voice to do this album anymore. Probably doesn't, but he could still do a passable version of it live, I think. And it's a shame that he doesn't. It's also, this is an album that I read through the years that was Paul's Beach Boy album, or was a Beach Boy sounding album, and I thought, it doesn't sound like the Beach Boys to me, and it doesn't when you think of those '60s Beach Boys songs. But if having since gotten familiar with the post Pet Sounds Beach Boys albums from like Smiley Smile up through Holland, this is very Beach Boys sounding album, and in a lot of ways, not California Girls type Beach Boys, but the things like Sunflower album and Smiley Smile album and so forth. I often wonder that critical consensus has come around to where this is considered a masterpiece of sorts, or at least a great album in the years since '71. Would have been interesting had this album been released, post-punk, like the late, say, '78, if he'd released this instead of London Town. Or imagine if he would have released this as the follow-up to Tug of War instead of Pipes of Peace. Interesting to think of how that would have been received if that had happened. Of course it didn't. It was released in 1971, but it is something to think about. So I got this album, like I explained in my video before this on McCartney. Didn't really start buying the solo Beatle albums till it was about 12 or 13, around 1977 or so, and I bought this with a bunch of solo albums, and I was aware, having read Beatle books and stuff, because I'd already had this and some other books at that point, that this was not held in high esteem at the time, and so I was surprised. I was expecting for it to not be very good, but I really liked it back then, and I've always liked it since. Um, anyway, there's the cover. I always thought that was kind of a neat cover. I always kind of liked it. Here's something for Joe, Mean Mr. Mayo there. It says Lily. You know what that means? That means Linda, I love Yoko. Who'da thunk? So, kind of surprising. And there's sort of Paul's statement on the state of the Beatles, circa 1971 there. And kind of a neat, colorful gatefold and some cool pictures. I always like this album cover. Yeah, so to the songs we go. Like I said, so he had the McCartney album, which is okay. I like it more now than I did then. Love the Another Day and A Woman, A Why 45, which was actually early sessions for Ram, even though it's not on the album, either one of those. This starts off Too Many People, first song on side one. Some people gave Linda grief for singing on the album. She does sing all over this album. Is she the best vocalist out there? Certainly not. But I don't care. I mean, her vocals work on this album, and to varying degrees on future albums. Sometimes not so much, sometimes okay. But I think they work here. She's not the best singer. She's a damn sight better than Yoko, you know. And I mean, hell, Mick Jagger can't sing, but he does fine. So, and he's better than Linda McCartney, but you know, I just never minded her vocals, and I think they add a sort of a naive charm to this album. So I don't really mind those. I love the drum fills on this song. I love Hugh McCracken's solo. I love the Paul where she's waiting for me, pause, yeah, and the guitar conclusion with Paul just hooting and yelling and barking like a dog and making all sorts of noise. Great song, great opener. I give this song a 10. Love it. Second song is Three Legs. Don't know what the hell he's singing about. This is sort of the beginning of the bad thing about this album, I guess, is sort of the beginning of Paul's nonsense, silly ass lyrics, which are all over this album. But the song's so catchy and cool. The guitar's really cool, especially toward the end. It's just a catchy as hell song that I can forgive the lyrics. Martha doesn't have three legs, so I'm not sure what he's talking about. I give it a 9. I like it. I like the fact that the first verse he sings normal, and then the second verse, I guess he moves closer to the microphone because it sounds like his voice is right there up front, right in your face. Give it a 9. It's a hell of a song. I love it. Third song is Ram On. Love the weird, I don't know whether it's piano or organ or whatever playing on the intro to that. Beginning of this song, love it that it goes into, I'm guessing it's a guitar, but it sounds like a banjo. Love the do-da-da-da, the kind of Beach Boys backing vocals on this. Love the fact that underneath is this weird, dreamy, otherworldly backing music going on, but up front song on top of that is just this sort of sunshine pop song. Another great one. I'm going to give it a 10. Song number 4 is Dear Boy. This is one where Lennon thought Paul was singing about him. Paul says he's singing about Linda's first husband. Cool background vocals. Great guitar again. This is one of Paul's best guitar albums, even though I think Hugh McCracken, Paul probably plays some guitar on here, but McCracken plays most of the guitar stuff, I think. But either way, it's great and it's good. And it's one of his best guitar albums. I really like that. I wish him and George would have done more guitar heavy work throughout their solo career, to be honest, than they did. even though they did other stuff. But yeah, Dear Boy, I give it a 9. Song number 5 is Uncle Albert Admiral Halsey, which of course I knew long before because didn't buy this album until about '77. I remember hearing that song on the radio when I was a kid, really even before I was into the Beatles. Was familiar with it. Um, like the sound of the thunder in there and the rain and the sound effects. Kind of a rainy day song for me. Kind of like Let It Be's the ultimate rainy day, cloudy rainy day album for me. This is also kind of plays into that. It's an ambitious ass song. You got to give it that. Like the flugelhorn in there, which I thought was a trumpet, but I looked it up and it's a flugelhorn, which is sort of a trumpet, but sort of not instrument. Some people say that with all the parts that he's putting together, or I mean, makes me think with all the parts that he's putting together that he's trying to recreate the medley on Abbey Road or A Day in the Life from Sergeant Pepper, or sort of a grand statement. This is more frivolous and kind of nutty song, so it doesn't scale those heights at all. And other people have said, I've heard people say that he's like of a Paperback Writer, that oh he's just showing off there, and he was showing off with Paperback Writer, but it's such a badass cool guitar song that it doesn't matter. This isn't as good as Paperback Writer, but it's pretty good, and I give it an 8 overall for Uncle Albert. Good stuff. Smile Away. Like the background, I don't know whether they're saying don't know how to do it or da 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 da. Can't really make out what they're saying, but it's cool. The background singing. It's just a big joyful noise of a song. He starts hooting and hollering and barking like a dog again at the end, which is always fun. I always like to hear him do that. I give that song a 10, which takes us to side 2 of the album. Opens with Heart of the Country. Cool guitar, but this time it's an acoustic guitar. Catchy as hell song. The scat singing, the sort of do 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 to Paul is great. Love the line, want a horse, want a sheep, want to get me a good night's sleep. It's just always makes me laugh. And I don't know, still don't know to this day when he says heart of the country, is he saying where the homely people go, like the ugly people go, or where the homey people go, like people that like hang out and stick close to home? Probably he's saying homey instead of homely, but I always kind of laugh because maybe he's saying that's where all the homely people go. Reminds me sort of of Neil Young, when he's in his Comes a Time type acoustic country mood songs. Of course, Paul doesn't sound anything like Neil Young. And by the way, next time if you're watching me and Mr. Mayo Joe, next time he does one of his live stream, live feed podcast, whatever the hell you call those, a live thing on YouTube, and he does them quite a bit. They're always a lot of fun. But if you catch one of those, be sure to ask him to do his Neil Young impression, because it's pretty priceless and worth the. And I like Neil Young; he's great. But Joe does a great Neil Young when he starts singing Sugar Mountain and all to tell the Sugar Mountain. But he can do a lot better than me. But be sure and ask him to do Neil Young next time you see him. Is all I'm saying. Heart in the Country, that gets a 10, by the way. Monkberry Moon Delight is next. Crazy lyrics, a piano up my nose, a dreadful cantado, a big tomato. I don't know if they're saying somebody's wearing a super do-rag up, but it's just bold screaming. It's silly. It's bold. Paul McCartney screaming his head off, big bold production song. Toward the end, it sounds like somebody says "suck it," Paul. Not sure. I love the bass run toward the very end of the song. I find overall Monkberry Moon Delight to be stupid, silly, and a ridiculous song, and I give it a 9 because I love it. It's great. Third song on side 2 is called Eat at Home, which is basically just a straightforward rocker. Nice guitar in it, a little bit generic, and it slows the momentum of the album a little bit. When he's talking about he wants to eat in bed, and he's telling the girl he wants to eat in bed and eat at home, I'm wondering what it is he's wanting to eat. If it's, what are these talking about eating there? If anybody knows, you might leave a comment. If they're pizza or spaghetti or steak and baked potatoes. Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I give this song is not a bad song, but I'm going to give it a 6. It sort of slows the album's momentum down a little bit there. Fourth song on a side 2 is called "A Long-Haired Lady." Silly song at the beginning. I shouldn't like it, but I do. The kind of reminds me in spirit of "Come and Get It," the Badfinger song that Paul wrote. But then after the beginning, the sort of silly "Do You Love Me" stuff with Linda singing that sounds kind of bad in a good way and kind of silly. Then the song just sort of starts to drag. It lasts too long, gets a little bit boring. But then when it goes into the love is long part, and the guitar and the horns at the begin, it picks up again. It's really good. Song's one of the longest on the album. I think it is the longest on the album. They could cut about a middle of that boring part, 30 or 40 seconds into the song when the dull part starts. They could have cut that down a little and compacted the song. I'm going to give it a 6.5. If they'd cut a little bit of it out, I'd probably give it an 8.5. Fifth song on side 2 is "Ram On" the Reprise, which sounds like it starts up where the other Ram Off leaves off, or it just starts up mid-song, which is kind of cool. And then it goes into a bit of "Big Barn Bed" at the very end, which will show up again on the Red Rose Speedway album. It's short, it's like 50 seconds. It's just a neat, weird little bridge thing. I really like it. I'm going to give that a 10 too. Last song on the album, "Backseat of My Car." There's nothing about this song I don't love. If "Another Day" is my favorite Paul McCartney solo song, this is my second favorite. And just the orchestration, the piano, the guitar, the background vocals, the "We Believe That We Can't Be Wrong" lines, the "No, no, no," when he starts screaming, "Yeah, yeah, yeah," the guitar comes in. You think the song's over, then the drums pound back in, and the guitar comes, and he's my, and screaming his head off. It gets a 10. So I was thinking, had written something here, but I forgot what it was. Just before I get to yeah, oh well, screw it, I can't remember. Anyway, yeah. So this is generally held to be the best Beatles solo album. It's either this or Plastic Ono Band or All Things Must Pass by George. And I don't know, the other two are probably better albums artistically, but this is more fun than those two albums. So I'm not going to decide right now which one's better. But overall, I give the album a 10, and I think that's all I got to say on that. And we'll be back with more stuff later. That's something else I was going to say, and I can't remember what it was, but I've gone on too long, so who cares? If I remember it, I'll bring it up later probably and bore you with it then.